The dirt under her fingernails had turned black 3 days ago, and no amount of scrubbing against the rough stone walls of the cellar could get it out. Elara pressed her palms flat against the cold floor, feeling the vibrations of footsteps above her, the only way she knew anyone was coming. The cellar beneath the Greymore packhouse smelled of turnip skins and lamp oil and something older, something like wet chalk, and she had lived in it for 6 years. She could not hear the footsteps. She had not heard anything since the fever took her hearing at 9 years old. But she could feel them. The heavy ones belonged to Beta Harlan. The quick, sharp ones were his daughter, Marin, and the dragging, uneven ones that came now, making the dust motes jump in the thin bar of light from the grate above. Those belonged to old Petra, the kitchen woman, who was the closest thing Elara had to someone who did not wish her dead. The grate lifted, Petra's weathered face appeared upside down, her lips moving. Elara read them. Brought you broth. Drink fast. They're coming for you. Petra lowered a clay bowl on a frayed rope. The broth was lukewarm and tasted of boiled bones with a ghost of rosemary. Elara drank it in 4 swallows, her throat working so fast she nearly choked. Her stomach cramped around the warmth, confused by it. She had eaten a raw potato yesterday, the day before nothing. She lifted the empty bowl and Petra hauled it back up. Then the old woman's lips moved again, slower this time, deliberate so Elara could read every word. Alpha King Callan is here. Greymore Pack is presenting Omegas. You are on the list. Elara's hands went still against the floor. She signed back, fingers quick and fluid, the language Petra had learned with her over 6 patient years. They would not present me. I am the deaf one. The broken one. Petra's face tightened. Her lips moved. Beta Harlan wants the king to see how many Omegas Greymore has. Numbers. You are a number, child. The grate closed. The light narrowed to its thin, bright stripe. Elara sat in the dark and felt her own heartbeat in her wrists, her neck, behind her eyes. She pressed her hand to the stone and counted the vibrations above her. More footsteps now, many. The whole packhouse was in motion. She looked down at herself. The dress Petra had found for her was linen, washed so many times it had gone from blue to the color of dishwater. It hung off her collarbone. Her arms were thin, her wrists sharp, and across her left forearm ran a scar from elbow to wrist where Marin had pushed her into the threshing blades 2 summers ago, laughing while Elara bled into the wheat chaff. The scar had healed, raised and pink and ugly, and Marin liked to grab it when she wanted Elara to flinch. Elara braided her hair with her fingers. It was long and dark, and the one thing about her that had not been starved thin. She tied it with a strip torn from her hem. Then the grate opened again, and hands reached down, not Petra's gentle ones, but thick, rough hands that grabbed her by the upper arms and hauled her up into blinding daylight. She stumbled on the kitchen flagstones. The world was so bright after the cellar that everything smeared into shapes and color. Slowly the shapes became people, and the people were staring at her. Beta Harlan stood in the doorway. He was a wide man with a red beard, going gray, and eyes the color of river mud. His lips moved and she read them even through her squinting. Clean her face. Put her at the end of the line. If the king asks, she is a kitchen worker. Do not let her use those hand signs. It looks like witchcraft. Someone shoved a wet cloth at her. She wiped her face, her neck, her hands. The cloth came away gray. A woman she did not recognize pushed her through the kitchen and down the hall and out into the courtyard, where the autumn air hit her like cold water, and she breathed it in so deep her ribs ached. There were 11 Omegas standing in a line in front of the packhouse. All of them in dresses far better than hers, all of them with brushed hair and cleaned faces and the particular terrified stillness of people trying to look calm. Alara took her place at the end. The cobblestones were cold under her bare feet. She curled her toes against them and watched. The courtyard was old and cracked and lined with birch trees that had gone gold with the season. Beyond the courtyard wall, she could see the Greymoor forest, dark pines marching up the hillside into mist, and in the center of the courtyard, where 3 black vehicles had pulled up on the gravel, men were stepping out. Not just men, wolves in human skin. She could feel it even without hearing, a pressure in the air, a weight that made the hair on her arms stand up. The Greymoor pack wolves were strong, but these men carried their power differently. It was not aggression, it was certainty. The way a river does not fight the rocks because it knows it will outlast them. And then one of them stepped forward and the air changed completely. He was taller than the others by a full head, broad across the shoulders in a way that made the black coat he wore look like it had been built around him rather than put on. His hair was dark, cut short, and the scar ran from his left temple down past his ear, disappearing into his collar. His jaw was hard, his mouth set in a line that looked like it had forgotten how to do anything else. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Even from 30 feet away, even through the haze of her squinting against the daylight, she could see they were amber, not brown. Amber, the color of pine resin held up to firelight. Alpha King Kalan of the Iron Fang Pack. She had never seen him before. She had seen drawings. Crude ones in the newspapers Petra, sometimes smuggled down to the cellar. But the drawings were wrong. They made him look merely large. They did not capture the way the air around him seemed to compress, the way the other wolves unconsciously shifted their weight backward when he moved. He was walking the line, slowly. His beater, a leaner man with silver-streaked hair and watchful eyes, walked 2 steps behind him. The Omegas went rigid as he passed each one. Alara could see them breathing too fast, could see the tiny tremors in their hands. She watched his lips as he spoke to Beta Harlan, who had rushed forward with the desperate energy of a man trying to sell something. 12. Harlan's lips said, "Greymoor has 12 unmated Omegas of age, Your Majesty. Healthy, strong, obedient." Kalan did not look at Harlan when the man spoke. He was looking at the Omegas. His expression did not change. He moved down the line with the unhurried patience of someone checking inventory, and something about that made Alara's stomach turn, not with fear, but with a quiet, stubborn anger she had learned to keep off her face. She was last in the line. She was the smallest, the thinnest, the only one with bare feet and a dress that had given up its color. She kept her eyes forward, and her hands still at her sides and her chin level. She would not tremble for him. She had trembled enough for the wolves of Greymoor. He reached the Omega before her, a girl named Sabel who was pretty and terrified, and whose hands were shaking so badly she had clasped them behind her back. Kalan barely paused. Then he reached Alara. She felt it before she understood it, a warmth that started at the base of her skull and spread down through her chest and into her stomach and her legs and her feet on the cold cobblestones. The cold vanished, the fear vanished. Something inside her chest, something she had no name for, lurched forward like a dog straining at a leash, pulling toward him. His eyes locked on her. She watched his face change. What dramatically, not the way faces changed in the stories Petra told her. It was small, a fraction of a second where his mouth opened slightly, where his nostrils flared, where those amber eyes went wide and then narrowed and then blazed with something that looked like fury and hunger and recognition all at once. His lips moved. She read them. "What is your name?" It was not a question. It was a demand. She did not speak. She had not spoken in 6 years, not since the fever stole the sound and her voice went strange and wrong, and the pack children had mocked the way it came out, flat and too loud and alien. She had stopped speaking and started signing. and when Harlan forbade the signing, she had stopped communicating with everyone except Petra. She stared at him. She did not answer. Something crossed his face. Confusion. His eyes dropped to her bare feet, to the scar on her arm, to the two thin wrists, to the hollow at the base of her throat where her collarbone jutted out. He looked at her the way someone looks at a wound. His lips moved again, slower this time. Why is she not speaking? Harlan rushed forward. Elarara watched his lips. She is defective, Your Majesty. Deaf since childhood. We included her only for count. She is a kitchen worker. She cannot hear, cannot speak. She is of no value. Kalane's head turned toward Harlan, and the expression on his face made Harlan take a full step backward. Elara felt the vibration in the ground change. The walls around her shifted, went tense. Whatever sound Callan was making, it was low and deep and powerful enough that she could feel it through the soles of her feet. A growl. She had felt growls before, the way other people heard thunder. This one was different. This one climbed up through the cobblestones and into her bones and settled there like a second heartbeat. Callan looked back at her. His lips moved carefully, deliberately, and she realized with a start that he was speaking slowly for her. That he had noticed, that he understood she was reading his mouth. Who did that? To your arm. She blinked. No one had ever asked about the scar. Petra had stitched it with sewing thread and rubbing alcohol in the cellar, and Marin had told Harlan that Elara had fallen, and Harlan had not asked further because he did not care. She raised her hand. She signed without thinking, her fingers spelling out the answer before she could stop herself. Marin, the Beta's daughter. Kalen's eyes followed her hands. He did not understand the signs. But his Beta stepped forward, the silver-haired man, and his lips moved. She signs, Your Majesty. I know some. She said a name, Marin. Callan's amber eyes swept the courtyard. Elara watched him find Marin, who was standing near the packhouse door in a green dress with her hair curled, watching the presentation with the proprietary smugness of someone whose father ran things. Marin's face went white. Callan did not look at Marin long. He looked back at Elara. He reached out, and his fingers touched her chin, tilting her face up. His hand was warm, startlingly warm, and his touch was so light she could have pulled away. She did not pull away. His lips moved. You are coming with me. Harlan surged forward. Your Majesty, she is a deaf Omega. She has no wolf. She cannot possibly serve as a companion to the king. Please allow me to present Sable, who is far more suited. She comes from a respected family within the pack and has received proper training in all the social graces. Harlan released Elara's chin. He turned to Harlan. He spoke one sentence. Elara read it. If you speak about her like that again, I will tear your tongue from your mouth and nail it to your packhouse door. The courtyard went absolutely still. Elara could feel the silence in the absence of vibration, in the way everybody around her stopped moving, stopped breathing. Callan shrugged off his coat. It was black, heavy, lined with something dark and soft. He draped it over Elara's shoulders. It engulfed her. It smelled of cedar smoke, and iron and something wild underneath, pine in rain, wet earth after a storm. She pulled it around herself instinctively, and the warmth of it was like being lowered into a bath. His lips moved again, to his Beta this time. Get her in the car. She does not walk on these stones another step. The silver-haired Beta, whose name she would later learn was Ronan, approached her carefully. He signed something clumsy but recognizable. Come. Safe. King says safe. She went with him because the alternative was staying, and because the warmth of the coat was the kindest thing anyone except Petra had done for her in 6 years, and because that strange lurching thing in her chest was still pulling. pulling toward the amber-eyed king, who had just threatened to rip out a man's tongue for calling her defective. The back seat of the vehicle was leather and heated and smelled of the same cedar smoke as the coat. She sat with her knees together and her bare feet on the warm floor and her hands in her lap. And she did not cry because she had taught herself not to cry where anyone could see, and instead she pressed her thumb against the scar on her arm and breathed. Cullen sat beside her, not across from her, beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body through the coat. He did not touch her again. He sat with his hands on his knees and his jaw clenched, and his amber eyes focused on something far away, and she watched the muscle in his jaw flex and release, flex and release. Then he turned to her, and his lips moved, and she read them, and what he said was not what she expected. "I have a garden. It is dying. I do not know why." She stared at him. His lips moved again. "It was my mother's. Behind the throne room. She kept it alive for 40 years. When she died, it began to die. Nothing I have done has stopped it." She did not know why he was telling her this. She did not know why the king of the most powerful pack in the Northern Territories was sitting beside a deaf, starving Omega in a cellar dress and telling her about a garden. She sighed slowly. "Why are you telling me this?" He watched her hands. He shook his head slightly. He did not understand sign language. She saw it, the frustration that crossed his face, not at her, but at himself, at the barrier between them. Ronan in the front seat turned. He signed and spoke at the same time. She says, "Why are you telling her about the garden?" Cullen looked at her. His lips moved. "Because you are the first thing in 2 years that has made my wolf go quiet." The drive took 4 hours. They crossed out of Grey Moor territory into the highlands, where the trees changed from birch and pine to ancient oaks with trunks as wide as the vehicle, their leaves burning copper and red. The road climbed. The air coming through the vents grew colder, thinner, cleaner. Alara fell asleep somewhere in the second hour. She had not meant to. But the seat was warm and the coat was heavy, and her body, which had been running on turnip skins and cold broth and adrenaline for 6 years, simply shut down. She woke to a hand on her shoulder, gentle and warm. Kalen's face was close, his lips moved. "We are here." She looked out the window and her breath stopped. Iron Fang Keep sat on a granite ridge above a valley filled with mist. It was not a house. It was not a mansion. It was a fortress, ancient stone walls covered in ivy that had gone crimson in the autumn cold, towers with narrow windows glowing amber with firelight, and a massive iron gate shaped like 2 wolves facing each other, their jaws open, their teeth interlocking. The gate stood open. Behind the fortress, the mountains rose in a wall of dark rock and snow. Callan got out first. He came around to her side and opened the door and offered his hand. She looked at it, the hand of a king. Scarred across the knuckles, wide palm, steady. She took it. He helped her out and did not let go. The cobblestones here were smooth and warm, she realized, heated from beneath. Her bare feet did not ache. People were gathered, wolves in human form, dozens of them, watching from the courtyard and the windows and the walls, and she could feel their attention like sunlight through a magnifying glass. Focused and burning, she tried to pull her hand from his. He held it, not hard, not possessively, just steady. He looked down at her, and his lips moved. "Do not let go. They need to see." She did not know what they needed to see. She was a deaf Omega with no wolf and no shoes, and a body that had been starved thin by a pack that considered her less than livestock. She was not a queen, she was not a Luna. She was a girl who could grow things. That was her secret. The one Petra knew, the one no one else had ever seen. In the cellar at Grey Moor, in the thin bar of light from the grate, she had kept 3 plants alive. A sprig of mint in a cracked cup, a fern that grew from a crack in the stone. and a small stubborn vine that had no business surviving in a cellar with no sun and no soil, but that had wrapped itself around a rusted nail and put out green leaves when she pressed her hands against the stone and willed it to live. She had never told anyone except Petra, in a pack that already thought she was worthless. Being the deaf Omega who talked to plants was not a survival strategy. Cullen led her through the keep. She absorbed it in fragments. A great hall with vaulted ceilings and a fire burning in a hearth large enough to stand in. Stone corridors lined with tapestries showing wolves running under moons in various phases. The smell of roasting meat and beeswax and old stone. Wolves who stepped aside and bowed their heads as Kylan passed, their eyes flickering to Alara with expressions she could not pass. He brought her to a room, not a cellar, not a servant's closet, a room with a bed that had 4 posts and a green coverlet and pillows, actual pillows, and a window that looked out over the valley in the mist. There was a fireplace with a fire already burning. There was a chair, a table, a pitcher of water, and a plate of bread and cheese and dried fruit. Callan stood in the doorway. His lips moved. "This is yours. Eat. Rest. I will send someone who can sign. Tomorrow I will show you the garden." He left. Alara stood in the room and looked at the bed and the fire and the food, and she pressed her thumb against the scar on her arm, and she did not cry. She ate the bread. She ate the cheese. She ate every piece of dried fruit on the plate and drank half the pitcher of water, and then she climbed onto the bed with a coat still wrapped around her, and she pressed her face into the pillow, which smelled of lavender and clean linen, and she slept for 14 hours. She woke to light and to a woman sitting in the chair by the window, knitting. The woman was perhaps 50, sturdy, with grey hair pulled back and kind eyes behind round spectacles. When she saw Elora stir, she put down the knitting and signed. "Good morning. My name is Britta. I was the king's mother's companion. I know sign. The king asked me to help you." Elora sat up. She signed. "Where am I?" "I am Fang Keep. You are the king's mate." Elara's hands went still. She signed slowly. "I do not have a wolf. I cannot be anyone's mate." Britta's expression was patient and sad and certain all at once. Her hands moved. "The bond does not need your wolf to know. It only needs your soul." Elara did not argue. She had felt it, the warmth, the pull, the way Callan's growl had climbed through the cobblestones and into her bones. She did not have words for it in any language, but she did not trust it either. She had learned at Greymore that anything warm could be taken away. Britta brought her clothes, simple but clean, well made, a soft grey dress that fit her, which meant someone had estimated her size, had looked at her and seen a body that needed care rather than a number in a line. Boots lined with wool, a thick shawl. There was a bath drawn in the adjoining room. The water was hot and fragrant with chamomile, and Alara sat in it until her fingers wrinkled and the water turned grey with 6 years of Greymore. And then she drained it and filled it again and sat in it until the water stayed clear. She looked at herself in the mirror afterward. She was thin. Her collarbone and ribs showed. The scar on her arm was vivid against her clean skin. But her eyes were large and dark and steady, and her hair, clean now, fell past her shoulders in waves that caught the light. She got dressed, and Britain led her through the keep, signing as they walked, giving her names for things and people. The cook was a massive man named Fen, who communicated primarily in grunts and hand gestures, even with hearing people, which made Alara like him immediately. The head of the guard was a woman named Dalla, who had one eye and a smile like a cracked whip. The keep had 200 wolves and a village beyond its walls, and the mountains protected them from the north, and the forest from the south, and the Iron Fang Pack had held this territory for 300 years. And then Britta brought her to the garden. It was behind the throne room, through a door that looked like it had not been opened in months. The hinges screamed when Britta pushed it, a sound Alara could not hear but could feel in the vibration of the wood under her hand. The garden was enclosed by stone walls 20 feet high, covered in dead ivy. It was perhaps half an acre, which was enormous for an interior garden. There were raised beds made of old stone, pathways of crushed gravel now overgrown with brown weeds, a fountain in the center that had stopped flowing, its basin cracked and dry. There were trellises for climbing roses, but the roses were black and brittle. There were herb beds that held nothing but dirt and the papery ghosts of dead basil. There were fruit trees, 2 of them that had dropped their last leaves and stood skeletal against the gray sky. Alara walked through it slowly. She knelt and pressed her hands into the soil of the nearest raised bed. The soil was cold. Dead cold, not the sleeping cold of winter soil waiting for spring, but the empty cold of soil that had given up. She dug her fingers in deeper and felt for the thing she always felt, the hum, the pulse, the slow electric whisper of things growing underground. Nothing, not nothing. Something, very faint, very deep, like a heartbeat heard through a wall, like her feeling vibrations through the cellar floor. The garden was not dead, it was deaf. The realization hit her with a force that made her sit back on her heels. She understood it in a way that language could not quite reach. The garden had been kept alive by something, someone, the king's mother, and when that someone died, the garden had lost the voice that spoke to it. It had not died, it had gone silent. It was waiting, the way Alara had waited in the cellar. Alive but unable to hear the world that had gone quiet around it. She pressed her hands deeper into the soil. She closed her eyes. She did what she had done with the mint sprig in the cracked cup and the fern in the stone crack and the vine on the rusted nail. She listened, not with her ears but with whatever it was inside her that had survived the fever and the silence and the 6 years of darkness. Come back, she thought. I know what it is to be cut off. I know. Come back. Under her palm, so faint she might have imagined it, the soil warmed. She opened her eyes. At the edge of the raised bed, in the crack between 2 stones, a single green shoot had pushed through the dirt. Tiny, fragile, impossibly alive. She stared at it. She heard, no, she felt, footsteps behind her, heavy, certain. She knew whose they were before she turned. Kalan stood at the garden door. He was dressed more simply than yesterday. A dark shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and she could see the tattoos on his forearms. Wolves and fawns and something that looked like a crown made of antlers. His amber eyes moved from her face to her hands in the dirt, to the green shoot at the edge of the bed. His lips moved. What did you do? She signed. She asked it to come back. He watched her hands. She remembered he did not understand sign, but his beta appeared behind him. Ronan, who translated quietly. Callan walked to the raised bed and knelt beside her. He was so close she could feel the heat of him, could smell the cedar smoke, and iron and rain-soaked pine. His hand reached out and his fingers brushed the green shoot, just barely. His lips moved. She has been dead for 2 years. This garden, my mother kept it alive with something I do not understand. Every gardener I have brought in has failed. They say the soil is wrong, the light is wrong, the drainage. They bring science to a problem that is not science. He looked at her. His amber eyes were very close. His lips moved again. What are you? She signed. I am a deaf omega from a cellar. Ronan translated. Kalan shook his head. His lips moved. No. You are not. The days that followed were the strangest of Alara's life. She was given free rein of the garden. No one questioned her. No one watched her with suspicion or contempt. Britta brought her meals and signed with her for hours, teaching her the history of the keep and the pack. And Alara taught Britannia new signs, one she had invented in the cellar for concepts that the standard sign language did not have. A sign for the feeling of vibrations through stone. A sign for the color of light through a grate. A sign for hunger that has become so familiar it feels like a companion rather than an enemy. She worked in the garden every day. She stripped the dead ivy from the walls and cleared the brown weeds from the paths and rebuilt the raised beds stone by stone. But the real work was invisible. Each morning she knelt in the soil and pressed her hands down and reached for that faint, deep pulse, and each morning it was a little stronger. Green things began to appear, not dramatically, not overnight. A patch of clover in the gravel path, new growth on the dead rose canes, tiny red buds like drops of blood. The herb beds put out tentative shoots of thyme and sage. One of the fruit trees produced 3 small, hard, impossibly green leaves on a branch that had been bare for 2 years. Kalan came to the garden every evening. He never interrupted her. He would stand at the door or sit on the stone bench by the broken fountain and watch her work. Sometimes he brought documents, papers he was reading, treaties or reports, but she noticed he rarely looked at them. He looked at her hands in the dirt, at the way she tilted her head when she was listening to whatever she listened to underground. On the 4th evening, he brought a book. He sat on the bench and opened it and began studying it with the focused intensity of a man teaching himself to defuse a bomb. Alara glanced over and saw the illustrations, hands in various positions, arrows showing movement. He was learning sign language. She turned back to her work so he would not see her face. She pressed her hands into the soil and felt the warmth there, stronger now. A steady pulse like a sleeping animal's breath, and she thought about a king who ruled the most powerful pack in the north, learning to speak with his hands because his mate could not hear his voice. On the 6th day, he signed his first word to her. It was clumsy. His large hands were not built for the delicate finger movements of sign, and he got the orientation wrong, and what he actually signed was closer to the word for table than the word for beautiful. But she knew what he meant. She signed back. "Your pronunciation is terrible." Ronan, who was standing nearby, translated and then began laughing. Kalan looked at Alara with an expression that she had never seen on his face before. The hard line of his mouth bent, not quite a smile. The ghost of one, the suggestion that a smile had once lived there and might, if given enough reason, come back. On the 8th day the fountain began to trickle. Alara had not touched the fountain. She had been working on the rose beds, coaxing the new growth with her hands and her patient, silent attention when she felt the vibration change beneath her knees. Water vibrates differently than footsteps. It is continuous, rhythmic, alive. She looked up and saw water seeping from the cracked basin of the fountain, not flowing properly, just a thin, uneven stream that pooled on the gravel and ran in a crooked line toward the nearest raised bed. She stood and walked to the fountain and put her hand on the stone rim. It was warm, the same warmth that she felt in the soil, the same pulse. The garden was waking up, not because of science, not because of proper drainage or correct soil pH or the right amount of light, because someone was listening to it again. Because someone who understood silence was kneeling in its dirt and saying with her hands and her patience and whatever strange power lived in her blood, "I hear you. I am here." But not everyone in the Iron Fang pack was ready to accept what Alara was. The resistance came, as it often does, from the person who had the most to lose. Her name was Seraphine. She was the daughter of Kylan's chief advisor, a man named Lord Aldrich, who had served the pack for 30 years and who had expected his daughter to become Kylan's Luna. Seraphine was tall, golden-haired, impeccable. She spoke 3 languages and could track a deer through snow for 15 miles, and her wolf was a pale, beautiful thing that the pack poets had written songs about. She hated Elara with the clean, efficient hatred of a woman whose carefully constructed future had been dismantled by a girl who could not hear. Elara first encountered Seraphine on the 9th day, in the corridor outside the garden. She was walking back to her room with dirt on her hands and under her nails and a smear of it on her cheek, and Seraphine was standing in the corridor like she had been waiting. Seraphine's lips moved. Elara read them. "You must be the deaf one." Elara stopped. She looked at Seraphine. She signed nothing. She simply waited. Seraphine stepped closer. Her lips moved again, slower, as though she was speaking to someone very stupid. "The king has brought many projects home. Broken birds, wounded wolves. He has a savior complex. It is his one weakness. You will be here for a month, perhaps 2, and then he will grow bored, and you will be sent to the village with the other strays." Elara watched her face. She looked for the cruelty and found it, yes, in the hard set of the jaw and the sharp eyes. But she also found something else. Behind the cruelty, underneath it, barely visible, a flicker of something that looked like grief. Seraphine had not simply expected to be Luna. She had wanted it. She had wanted him, not the title, not the power, but him. And now she was standing in a corridor facing the reality that the universe had chosen someone else, and there was nothing her 3 languages or her beautiful wolf or her 15-mile tracking range could do about it. Elara signed slowly and clearly, knowing Seraphine could not understand. "I am sorry he is not yours." She walked past. Seraphine did not follow, but Seraphine was not the real danger. The real danger came from further away, from Greymore, from Beta Harlan, who had spent 2 weeks stewing in humiliation and fear after the Alpha King had threatened to tear out his tongue in his own courtyard. Harlan was not a brave man. He was not a strong man, but he was a cunning one, and he understood that the deaf Omega he had kept in a cellar for 6 years was now the mate of the most powerful Alpha in the north, and that as she told the king what had been done to her, what had really been done, not just the scar on her arm, but the years of starvation, the cold, the darkness, the times Marin had locked the grate and poured water through it in winter, so that Elara woke in a puddle of ice. The king's retribution would be absolute, so Harlan did what cunning, frightened men do. He made an alliance. He sent word to Lord Aldrich. The message, carried by a runner who crossed the border between Greymore and Iron Fang territory under cover of a trade delegation, was simple. The deaf Omega is not what she seems. She has powers that are unnatural. She is not a true Omega. She is something else, something dangerous, and if the king bonds with her fully, she will destroy the Iron Fang pack from the inside. It was a lie, but it was a lie built on the skeleton of truth, which is the most dangerous kind. Aldrich received the message. He read it in his study, which smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather, and the particular mustiness of a man who had accumulated too many books and not enough ventilation. He read it twice. He set it down. Aldrich was not a villain. He was a man who had served the Iron Fang pack his entire life, who had loved Cullen's mother, who had watched Cullen grow from a difficult, angry boy into a difficult, angry king. He wanted what was best for the pack. He also wanted his daughter to be happy. These 2 desires were tangled together so tightly that he could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. He brought the message to Seraphine. She read it in her room, standing by the window, and Aldrich watched his daughter's face and saw the struggle there, saw the moment when grief and jealousy wrestled with decency, and decency almost won. Almost. She closed her eyes for 3 full seconds. When she opened them, her face was set. "We need proof," she said. "If the Omega is dangerous, we need proof. Bring me the Greymore records. I want to know what she is." Aldrich nodded. He left. In the hallway he stopped and pressed his hand to the wall and closed his eyes and breathed. Something in his chest felt wrong, not his heart, his conscience. But he went anyway. Elara did not know about any of this. She knew only the garden. By the third week, the transformation was visible to everyone. The roses were blooming, not the tentative buds of before, but full, open flowers, deep red and cream and a variety she had never seen before. That was the exact color of Callan's amber eyes. The herb beds were thick with growth. The fruit trees had put out so many leaves that they cast actual shade. The fountain was flowing properly now, a steady stream of clear water that filled the basin and overflowed into a channel that fed the raised beds. The clover on the gravel paths had been joined by chamomile and small white flowers you did not know the name of. The air in the garden smelled of green growing things and wet stone and the particular sweetness of roses in cold air. And something else was happening, something she had not expected. The garden was talking back, not in words, not in sounds she could hear, in feelings, in warmth and cold, in the direction the vines grew, in the way the flowers turned toward her when she entered, like sunflowers tracking light. She could feel the garden's moods. In the morning it was slow and reluctant, like a creature that did not want to wake. In the afternoon it was energetic, pushing out new growth so fast she could almost see it. In the evening, when the light went gold and the shadows lengthened, it was calm, contented. She had never had a conversation this long with anything alive. Kalen's sign language improved. By the third week he could manage simple sentences, though his grammar was creative and his finger placement was sometimes so wrong that she had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing. One evening in the garden, as she was training a new vine along the repaired trellis, he signed to her. "You make dead things live. How?" She signed back. "They are not dead. They are just not being heard." He looked at her for a long time. Then he signed, clumsily but clearly. "Like you." Her hands went still on the vine. He stepped closer. He signed again, at Greymore. "They did not hear you. But you were not dead." "No," she signed. "I was not dead." He reached out and took her hand, the one with the dirt under the nails, the one that could reach into cold soil and find the last ember of life and breathe on it until it caught. He held it in both of his, and she felt his warmth, that same warmth that the mate bond sent through her bones. And she felt the garden respond, the vine under her other hand growing perceptibly, putting out a new tendril that curled around the trellis like a finger closing. His eyes dropped to the vine. He looked back at her. His lips moved, not signing, speaking, because what he wanted to say was too important for his clumsy new vocabulary. Ronan was not there to translate. No one was there. It was just them, in the garden, in the evening light. She read his lips. "I have been a king for 8 years. I have commanded armies and signed treaties and judged criminals, and none of it, not one moment, has been as meaningful as watching you bring this garden back to life." She felt the heat climb her cheeks. She signed one-handed because he was still holding the other. "That is because your other work involves people, and people are harder than plants." He smiled, not the ghost of a smile, not the suggestion of one. An actual smile, small and crooked and startling, on a face that had been carved for severity. It changed everything about him. It made him look younger. It made him look like someone who had once been happy and had forgotten and was just now remembering. She stared at him, and the garden pulsed around them, and the roses turned their faces toward her like an audience. That night, alone in her room, she pressed her hands to the stone wall and felt the vibrations of the keep. Hundreds of heartbeats, hundreds of breaths, the deep bass note of the mountain beneath them all. She felt Callan's heartbeat. She could find it now among all the others, the way you can pick out a single voice in a choir. Except she had never heard a choir, So instead it was the way you can find one particular warmth in a room full of different temperatures. His heart was steady and strong, and she fell asleep listening to it through the stone. The crisis came on the 27th day. Elara was in the garden at dawn, as she always was. The early light was thin and silver, and the garden was in its slow morning mood. The flowers still closed, the fountain murmuring. She was turning the soil in the far bed, the one that had been the most resistant to her efforts, the one she suspected had been the Queen's personal bed, when her hands struck something in the dirt. It was a stone, not an ordinary stone. It was flat, oval, the size of her palm, and when she lifted it from the soil and wiped the dirt away, it was iridescent. It shifted color as she turned it. Blue, green, silver, amber, and on its surface, carved in lines so fine she had to hold it up to the light, was a symbol she had seen before. On her own body. She pulled up her sleeve and looked at the inside of her right wrist. There in the skin, barely visible, a mark she had always thought was a birthmark, a circular pattern of interlocking lines that she had covered with bracelets at Greymore because Marin had once told her it looked like a brand, and the other children had called her Marked One, and thrown stones. The pattern on the stone was identical. Her hands were shaking. She pressed the stone to her chest and knelt in the dirt and tried to breathe. The garden surged around her. The roses bloomed wider. The vine on the trellis put out 3 new feet of growth in seconds. The fountain's stream doubled. She could feel the garden responding to whatever was happening inside her, amplifying it, feeding it back. She did not hear the garden door open. She did not feel the footsteps because the ground was vibrating with so much other energy. She did not know Seraphine was there until a hand seized her arm and spun her around. Seraphine's face was twisted with something beyond jealousy. Elara read her lips. I knew it. I knew you were not a normal Omega. Look at the garden. Look at what you are doing. This is not natural. You are not natural. Behind Seraphine stood Lord Aldrich and 2 Iron Fang guards, and behind them, just arriving, pulled from a morning council meeting by the commotion, Kalan. His amber eyes took in the scene in an instant. Seraphine's hand on Alara's arm. The stone clutched to Alara's chest. The garden in full riotous bloom around them, more alive than it had been even in the late Queen's time. Aldrich stepped forward. He spoke, and Elara read his lips. Your Majesty, I have received intelligence from Greymore. The Omega is not what she claims. She carries a mark on her wrist that matches the hearthstone of the Iron Fang lineage. She is either a plant, a spy sent to infiltrate through counterfeit mate bond, or she is something far more dangerous. She is awakening powers that have been dormant in this garden for centuries, and we do not know what she intends to do with them. Callan looked at Elara. She held up the stone. She showed him the mark on her wrist. She signed, her hands shaking. I do not know what I am. I have never known. I only know I can make things grow. Callan looked at the stone. He looked at the mark. Something changed in his face, something slow and tectonic, like a crack spreading through ice. He turned to Aldrich. His lips moved. That mark. Show me the archives, now. He did not go with Aldrich immediately. He went to Elara first. He knelt beside her in the dirt, something a king does not do, and he took her shaking hands and held them. His lips moved. Whatever you are mine. Do you understand? Whatever they find, whatever the archives say. You are mine and I am yours, and nothing in this world or the next changes that. Then he stood and followed Aldrich out of the garden, and the guards went with him, and Seraphine stood for a moment longer, looking at Elara with that complicated expression that was hatred and grief, and something that might have been the earliest seed of reluctant recognition. Then Seraphine looked at the garden, at the roses and the flowing fountain and the green vine and the flowers that were turning even now toward Alara like she was the sun. Seraphine's lips moved, quiet, almost to herself. Alara almost missed it. She would have loved you, the queen. She would have loved this. Then Seraphine left and Alara was alone in the garden with the stone in her hand and the mark on her wrist and the warm, pulsing life of a place that had waited 2 years for someone who could hear it. Callan was gone for 7 hours. Alara spent them in the garden. She could not eat. She could not rest. She worked the soil with hands that trembled and waited, and the garden, sensing her distress, grew subdued. The flowers closed. The fountain slowed. The vine stopped reaching. It was as though the entire garden was holding its breath with her. Rita came in the 4th hour. She sat on the stone bench and knitted and did not try to sign or tore. She simply sat there, her needles clicking in a rhythm Alara could feel through the bench, steady and grounding. In the 7th hour, the garden door opened. Callan stood in the doorway. His face was pale and his eyes were blazing, and he was holding a book, an enormous leather-bound thing that looked like it had not been opened in a generation. He walked to her. He knelt. He opened the book. The pages were old, the ink faded, but the illustrations were clear. They showed a lineage, a family tree. At its roots were names she did not recognize, ancient names, wolves from before the packs had territories, before the kings and the betas and the hierarchies. And in the margins, drawn with careful faded lines, were marks, symbols, the same interlocking circular pattern that was on the stone and on her wrist. Callan's lips moved. She read them. The Hearthstone Keepers, a line of wolves who carried the earth gift. They could make things grow. They could heal the land. The old queens of Ironfang all had it. My mother was the last. The line was supposed to be extinct. He pointed to a name on the page. A woman who had left Ironfang territory 40 years ago, before Callan's mother became queen. A woman who had gone south to Greymoor. Your grandmother, Callan's lips said, she went to Greymoor and married into the pack, and the gift went dormant for 2 generations. Until you. Alara stared at the page. Her grandmother. A woman she had never known. A woman from Ironfang, from this pack, from this garden. She had not been put in the cellar because she was worthless. She had been put in the cellar because someone at Greymoor, someone old enough to remember, had known what she was and had been afraid of it, had starved it, had tried to kill it. And when the gift refused to die, when it kept reaching for light through the cracks, they had simply pretended it did not exist. She was not an outsider here. She was the garden's heir. The realization broke something open in her chest. Not a wall, not a dam. Something older than that. Something that had been locked tight since she was 9 years old, and the fever took her hearing and the world went silent, and everyone around her decided that silence meant emptiness. The garden erupted, not gently, not gradually. The roses opened so wide their petals fell, and new ones grew in seconds. The fruit trees burst into blossom, white and pink. In the middle of autumn, the vine grew 10 feet in a minute, reaching up the wall toward the sun. The dead ivy on the walls came back to life, turning green from the base up, racing toward the sky. The fountain surged, water arcing 3 feet above the basin, catching the light, chamomile and thyme and sage and plants she did not know. Plants that might not have grown in this garden for centuries, pushed up through the soil and the gravel and the cracks in the stone. And at the center of it all, kneeling in the dirt with the stone in her hand and tears on her face, Alara felt something else. Deep in her chest, deep in the place where her wolf was supposed to be, the place that had been silent for 18 years, something stirred. Not a wolf. Not exactly. Something older, something that was part wolf and part earth and part the vibration of every living thing she had ever touched. It rose up through her like sap through a tree, and it opened its eyes inside her, and it was vast and green and humming with a power that made the ground shake. Callan staggered, not from fear, from the force of it. The mate bond between them, which had been a warm thread since the day they met, became a rope, a cable, a root system spreading through the earth beneath them. He gasped, and his eyes went gold, fully gold, his wolf surging to the surface, and for the first time Alara could see the wolf behind his eyes. Could see it, the way she could see the life in the soil. A massive dark creature with amber eyes that looked at her with an expression that was not possessive, was not hungry, was simply home. She was home, but home, she was about to learn, had to be defended. The attack came that night. Harlan had not waited for Aldrich's response. He had interpreted the silence as failure. He had spent 3 weeks gathering allies, other pack leaders who feared the Ironfang pack's dominance, rogues who owed him debts, and Maren, his daughter, who had her own reasons for wanting Alara destroyed. Maren had grown up torturing Alara. She had poured ice water through the grate and laughed. She had pushed Illyra into the threshing blades and watched her bleed. She had broken Elira's one good cup, the one with the mint sprig, and told her no deaf Omega deserved anything green and growing. Maren had done these things not because she was evil in the way of fairy tale villains, but because she was the daughter of a man who measured worth by strength. And Alara's existence, silent and patient and stubbornly alive in the cellar below, was a daily reminder that some things survive without power, without voice, without any of the qualities Maren had been taught to value. Maren hated Alara because Alara made her father's philosophy a lie. They came over the western wall at midnight. 40 wolves, not enough to take Ironfang by force, but enough for a strike team, enough to reach the garden, which was what Harlan wanted. Not Alara. The stone. He had guessed, from the rumors that had filtered back, that the Hearthstone was real and in Alara's possession, and the Hearthstone, according to the oldest legends, could command the earth itself. The first Alara knew of the attack was when the garden screamed. Not a sound, a feeling, a tearing, ripping agony that shot up through the soil and into her hands and through her body like electric current. She sat up in bed gasping, her hands burning, and she knew with absolute certainty that something was wrong in the garden. Something was hurting it. She ran. Bare feet on stone, the corridors of the keep dark around her, the torches guttering. She ran without thinking, without planning, without stopping to find Kailan or the guards or anyone. She ran because the garden was calling her, and she could no more ignore it than she could ignore her own heartbeat. She burst through the garden door and stopped. Wolves. 6 of them, grey and brown and snarling, tearing at the raised beds, digging at the soil, searching for the stone. Behind them, in the doorway on the opposite side, stood Harlan in human form with a lantern directing them. And beside Harlan, in a coat too fine for the cold, stood Maren. Maren saw Alara first. Her face changed. Something crossed it that was not quite fear and not quite satisfaction. She pointed, and her lips moved, and the wolves turned. Alara stood in the doorway of the garden with bare feet and a sleeping dress and the hearthstone, which she had kept under her pillow because the garden had whispered to her to keep it close, clutched in her right hand. The first wolf lunged. What happened next she would later piece together from the marks in the garden and the accounts of the wolves who witnessed it, because in the moment itself she was not thinking at all. She was feeling. She slammed her free hand down on the ground, and the garden responded. Roots erupted from the soil. Not thin, tentative roots, but massive ones, thick as a man's arm, bursting through the raised beds in the gravel paths and the cracks in the stone walls. They wrapped around the lunging wolf and pinned it to the ground. More roots followed, reaching for the other wolves, rising from the earth like living ropes. The vine on the trellis tore itself free and whipped across the garden, catching a wolf in mid-leap and slamming it against the wall. The fruit trees bent, their branches sweeping down like arms, catching and holding. In 10 seconds, 5 of the 6 wolves were pinned. The 6th, the largest, got past the roots. It was almost on her when a dark shape hit it from the side with a force that cracked the flagstones. Kalen, in wolf form. He was massive, black-furred, with amber eyes that burned in the dark garden. He caught the grey wolf by the throat and threw it into the fountain basin. The fountain surged, water pinning the wolf down, and roots grew up through the cracked stone and held it. More iron-fang wolves poured through the garden doors. The fight spread beyond the garden walls. Elara could feel it through the ground, the thunder of wolves running, the impact of bodies, the deep bass vibration of combat. She stood in the center of the garden with her hand on the ground and her power flowing through the earth like water through a root system, reaching out to the walls, the courtyard, the ground beyond. She could feel every wolf. She could feel Kalen, a blaze of heat and fury, and the mate bond singing between them like a plucked wire. She could feel Harlan running, his footsteps panicked and uneven. She could feel Marin standing frozen by the far door. The fight lasted 12 minutes. When it was over, the Greymoor wolves were defeated, pinned by roots or held by Ironfang wolves or simply unconscious. Harlan was dragged into the garden by 2 guards, his face bloody, his eyes wild. He was thrown onto the gravel path at Elara's feet. Cullen shifted back. He stood in the garden, naked and scarred and breathing hard, and his amber eyes found Elara, and he crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, and his hands cupped her face and his lips moved. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. She signed. "The garden protected me." He looked at the garden, at the massive roots still holding wolves down, at the vine that had fought, at the trees that had bent to catch intruders, at the fountain that had become a weapon. He looked back at her. His lips moved. "The garden did not protect you. You protected the garden. And the garden protected you back." He pressed his forehead to hers. She could feel his breath on her face, warm and ragged. She could feel his heartbeat through his chest, fast and hard. The mate bond between them was a living thing, a root system of its own, and it was singing. Harlan was bound and placed against the garden wall. His lip was split, and his fine coat was torn, and he looked, for the first time since Elara had known him, small. She walked to him and stood above him and looked down at him, and his eyes met hers, and she saw the fear there, the understanding that the girl he had kept in a cellar was now standing in a garden that obeyed her, beside a king who would kill for her. His lips moved. "You were always wrong. You were always wrong, and I should have seen it. You were the most valuable thing in my pack, and I put you in a hole." Elara looked at him. She felt unexpectedly nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not pity, just a vast, clean emptiness where the hatred should have been, and in that emptiness a single clear thought: he could not hurt her anymore. She turned away from him. Marin was harder. Marin had not fought. Marin had not run. She was standing by the garden door with her arms wrapped around herself, and her face pale and her eyes wide, and she looked in that moment exactly like what she was. A 22-year-old woman whose father had raised her to believe that cruelty was strength, and who was now watching that philosophy collapse around her. Elara walked to her. They were the same height. They had the same dark hair, though Marin's was clean and styled and Elara's was tangled with soil. They looked at each other. Marin's lips moved. "Are you going to kill me?" Elara raised her hands in sign, knowing Marin could not understand, and then she reached out and took Marin's hand, the hand that had pushed her into the threshing blades, and she pressed it against the nearest raised bed where the soil was warm and alive. Marin flinched. Her eyes went wide. She looked down at her hand in the dirt, and Alara saw the moment when Maren felt it. The pulse, the hum, the whisper of green things growing, and Maren's face crumpled and she jerked her hand away and tears rolled down her cheeks and she turned and walked away without speaking. It was not forgiveness. Alara did not forgive her. It was something else, something Alara did not have a sign for. The decision to let someone feel the weight of what they had tried to destroy, rather than destroying them in return. The aftermath took 3 days. Harlan and the Greymoor wolves were held for judgment. Lord Aldrich, who had passed Harlan's message to Seraphine, who had allowed suspicion to take root, came to Kaelin and confessed everything. He stood in the throne room with his hands at his sides and his back straight, and he told the truth. Kaelin listened. His face was stone. When Aldrich finished, Kaelin spoke. Alara, standing beside the throne, read his lips. "You served my mother for 30 years. You held my kingdom together when I was too young to hold it myself. You taught me to read and to fight and to rule. And you let your fear and your love for your daughter blind you to a threat that nearly killed my mate." Aldrich lowered his head. Kaelin continued. "You will step down as chief advisor. You will remain in the pack. You will live, but you will not hold power again. Your daughter will not be punished for speaking the truth in the garden, because what she said about my mother loving the garden was true, and because I will not punish grief." He looked at Alara. She saw the question in his eyes, the check, the deference. Not a king deciding, a mate asking. She nodded. Harlan's punishment was different. Kaelin stood in the courtyard, in front of the assembled pack, and he held Harlan by the collar, and he spoke in a voice that Alara could feel in the cobblestones. She read his lips. "This man kept my mate in a cellar for 6 years. He starved her. He denied her light. He denied her warmth. He let his daughter scar her body and break her spirit, and he did all of this because he was afraid of what she could do. He was right to be afraid, but his fear does not excuse his cruelty." Harlan was stripped of his rank, his pack, his name. He was banished to the wastelands beyond the northern mountains where the wind never stopped and nothing grew. Alara thought this was a particular kind of justice, to send a man who had kept a gardener in darkness to a place where gardens were impossible. Maren went with him. She chose to. Alara watched her climb into the vehicle that would take her north, and at the last moment Maren looked back, not at Alara, but at the garden wall, the wall behind which green things grew and a fountain sang and roses bloomed in defiance of the season. Her face was unreadable. Then she was gone. On the night of the full moon, 1 week after the attack, the Iron Fang pack gathered in the garden. Alara had asked for this, not the throne room, not the courtyard, the garden where everything had started and where everything she felt should be made official. The garden was magnificent. The roses were in full impossible bloom, red and cream and amber and a deep purple that had not existed before Alara's power awakened. The fruit trees bore actual fruit, small and hard and not yet ripe, but present, a promise. The fountain ran clear and strong, reflecting the moon. The ivy on the walls was deep green and thick and alive. The air smelled of growing things and cold stone and the particular sweetness of chamomile crushed underfoot. 200 wolves filled the garden and the corridors beyond it. Torches burned in iron brackets. The moon hung above the stone walls, full and white. Kaelin stood at the fountain. He was dressed in black, his Alpha King formal wear, and the torchlight caught the silver in his collar and the amber of his eyes. He was not smiling. His face was the face of a king, severe and certain, but his hands, when Alara walked toward him through the crowd, were shaking slightly, and she saw it, and it was that tiny tremor that undid her. He was afraid. Not of her. Not of the ceremony, of the magnitude of it, of the fact that 8 years of ruling alone were about to end, and he was not certain he deserved the ending. She reached him. She took his shaking hands. She held them. Brisna stood nearby, ready to translate, but Callan did not need her. He had practiced this. He had practiced this for 2 weeks, every night, his big hands shaping the words over and over until they were right. He signed to her, in front of his entire pack, in the language he had learned for her. "You are my mate. You are my Luna. You are the heart of this garden, and the heart of this pack, and the heart of me. I was a king without a heartbeat, until you knelt in the dirt and woke everything up." His signs were not perfect. He mixed up the sign for heart and the sign for stone, so what he technically said was, "You are the stone of me," which was, Alara thought, more accurate anyway. She signed back. She signed fast and fluid, and the signs were beautiful, the way language is beautiful when it is someone's native tongue, and what she said was this: "You learned my language. You learned to speak in silence. You are the first person who ever tried to meet me where I am, instead of demanding I come to where you are. That is not power. That is not a crown. That is love, and I choose it." Britta translated, her voice thick with tears, and the garden was silent and the pack was silent, and the only sound Alara could not hear was the wind and the roses. Callan tilted her head. He pressed his lips to the place where her neck met her shoulder, and she felt his teeth, sharp and deliberate, and the bite was brief and precise, and it hurt in a way that was not pain, but transformation, the way a seed hurts when it cracks open. The mark bloomed. She felt it spread, warm and permanent, and the mate bond that had been a root system became a forest, became a world, became something so vast and interconnected that she could feel every wolf in the garden, every heartbeat, every breath. She could feel Kylan's heart, not through stone, not through vibrations, through the bond itself, direct and intimate in hers. The pack howled. She could not hear it, but she could feel it, 200 voices vibrating through the ground and the walls and the air, and Callan's arms were around her, and the garden was blooming, and the moon was white above the walls, and she was not in a cellar. She was not a number in a line. She was not the deaf one, the broken one, the defective one. She was the Luna of Iron Fang. She was home. The garden grew. In the weeks that followed, it spilled over the walls. Ivy climbed the towers of the keep. Roses appeared in the courtyard cracks. The village beyond the walls reported that their fields, which had been struggling for years, were suddenly producing at twice the normal rate. The forest at the edge of Iron Fang territory grew denser, healthier, the trees taller. Alara worked in the garden every day. Some things did not change. She still knelt in the dirt. She still got soil under her nails. She still spoke to the green things in the language of warmth and patience that no one else could hear. But some things were different. Callan came every evening. He brought his documents now, his treaties and reports, and he actually read them, sitting on the stone bench with his coat off and his sleeves rolled up. And sometimes he signed a question to her about pack politics or border disputes, and she signed back an answer, and they had silent conversations while the garden grew around them and the fountain sang and the roses turned their faces toward her. Britta taught 3 more people to sign, and 5, then 12. By the 2nd month, there were 20 members of the Iron Fang pack who could speak Ilara's language, and the signing spread outward from the keep into the village, carried by the cooks and the guards and the children, who learned fastest of all. Seraphine, to Ilara's surprise, was one of the 12. She came to Brittany's lessons stiffly, sitting apart from the others, her face carefully neutral. She did not speak to Ilara. She did not seek her out. But she learned, and one day in the corridor she passed Ilara and her hands moved, quick and small, as though she did not want anyone to see. "Thank you for the garden." Ilara signed back, "It is not mine. It belongs to everyone who listens." Seraphine looked at her for a long moment, then she nodded once and walked away. It was not friendship. It might never be. But it was something. On a night in late autumn, with the first frost silvering the garden walls and the roses still blooming in defiance of the cold, Alara sat in the dirt beside the fountain and pressed her hand to the soil and felt the pulse beneath the earth, steady and strong and utterly awake. The hearthstone hung on a chain around her neck, warm against her skin, and the mark on her wrist glowed faintly in the moonlight. Kaelan found her there. He sat beside her in the dirt, in his king's clothes, without hesitation. He signed, "Come to bed." "It is cold," she signed. "The garden is not cold." He looked around at the green, blooming, impossible garden, surrounded by frost and dark and winter closing in, and he signed, "No, it is not." He reached over and took her hand, the one with the dirt under the nails, the one that could wake the earth. He held it. He did not try to clean it. He did not flinch from the soil. She leaned into him. She felt his heart beat through his chest, steady and strong, and hers. The fountain murmured. The roses held their petals open to the cold. Somewhere in the garden a new shoot pushed through the frozen soil, green and stubborn and alive, reaching for the light it could not yet see, but absolutely trusted was there.